The crystal glass shattered against marble with a sound like breaking bones. Alessia Romano didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, the wet crack of a skull meeting concrete, the final gasp of a man drowning in his own blood, the silence after a gunshot that said more than any scream ever could. A wine glass was nothing. But the man whose custom Italian suit now bore a crimson stain that looked disturbingly like arterial spray, he was something. Dante Moretti didn't rise from his chair. He didn't need to. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace, invisible but impossible to ignore. His eyes, dark as a moonless night, lifted from the spreading stain on his jacket to her face. Most people looked away from Dante Moretti. The smart ones did, anyway. Allesia met his gaze. Not in challenge. Not in defiance. Just the steady, practiced calm of someone who'd learned long ago that showing fear was the fastest way to become prey. 2 years of running had taught her that much. 2 years of being invisible, of serving drinks to men who trafficked in death like other men traded stocks, of listening to conversations that could end wars or start them. 2 years of pretending she was no one. "My apologies, signore," she said, her voice flat, professional. She reached for the fallen glass, aware of the 8 men at his table who'd gone still as hunting dogs catching a scent. "I'll bring a cloth immediately." "Leave it." His voice was smoke and gravel, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. The kind that gave orders and expected obedience the way gods expected worship. Allesia straightened slowly, empty-handed. The restaurant, Café Marcello, a failing establishment on the edge of the industrial district, had gone quiet. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Everyone knew who Dante Moretti was. Everyone knew what happened to people who inconvenienced him. "Your men are blocking the exit," she said. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew at the moment the words left her mouth. But something in her, some stubborn, self-destructive part that 2 years of running hadn't managed to kill, refused to play the role of the trembling girl anymore. One of his men, a boulder of a human being with a scar that split his left eyebrow, moved forward. "You should watch your... Marco." Dante didn't raise his voice. Didn't even look at the man. But Marco stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. Dante was still watching her. Reading her. Those dark eyes cataloging details that most people missed, the way she'd angled her body toward the kitchen exit, the fact that her hands were steady despite having just spilled wine on one of the most dangerous men in the country, the absence of tears or stammered apologies. "What's your name?" he asked. "Allesia." "Just Allesia?" "Just Allesia." A muscle twitched in his jaw. Amusement, maybe. Or irritation. With men like him, the difference was often a matter of degrees rather than kind. "How long have you worked here, just Allesia?" 3 months. "And before that?" "Before that isn't your business, signore." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marco's hand moved toward his jacket. 2 other men shifted in their chairs. But Dante held up one hand, barely a gesture, just a slight lift of his fingers, and everyone froze. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said softly. "I suppose it isn't." He reached into his jacket, Marco relaxed fractionally, and pulled out a money clip thick enough to choke a horse. He peeled off several bills without looking at them and placed them on the wine-soaked table. "For the suit," he said. "And the entertainment." Then he stood. 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in tailored fabric and old money. His men rose with him, a choreographed movement that spoke of years working together, of loyalty bought or earned or taken. Dante Moretti walked past her without another glance, his footsteps measured and unhurried. His men followed like wolves following their alpha. The one called Marco shot her a look that promised future pain, but she was used to those. She'd been receiving death threats since she was 16. The door closed behind them. The restaurant exhaled. Conversation resumed like someone had pressed play on a paused recording. In the kitchen, dishes clattered. Someone laughed, high and nervous. Alessia collected the money from the table, far more than the suit was worth, probably more than she made in a month, and felt the weight of it in her palm like a noose tightening. She should have kept her mouth shut. She should have played the part. She should have remembered that invisible meant safe, and safe meant alive. Behind the bar, Giuseppe, the owner, was staring at her with eyes like a landed fish. "Alessia, what the hell was that?" "Bad luck," she said. Because that's what it was. Bad luck that Dante Moretti chose tonight to eat here. Bad luck that she'd been assigned to his table. Bad luck that her past and her present had nearly collided in a shower of broken glass and spilled wine. Bad luck? That was Dante Moretti. Do you know who? I know who he is. Everyone knew who Dante Moretti was. The undisputed ruler of the Northern Syndicate, the man who'd unified 5 warring families under one banner through a combination of strategic genius and ruthless violence. The man who didn't keep mistresses or wives, who built his empire on the principle that emotional attachments were weaknesses to be exploited. The man whose rise to power, 6 years ago, had started with a betrayal that left 37 people dead in a single night. Including her parents. Alessia's hands were still steady as she walked to the kitchen, but something cold had settled in her chest. A premonition, maybe. Or just the certainty that invisibility was a finite resource, and she'd just spent too much of hers in a single moment of stupid pride. She lasted 4 more hours. Served drinks. Smiled at appropriate times. Collected tips and avoided eye contact and pretended everything was normal. But when her shift ended at midnight, when she stepped out into the alley behind Café Marcello with her coat pulled tight and her keys threaded through her fingers like makeshift brass knuckles, she knew. The black Mercedes was parked across the street, windows tinted, engine running. She'd seen it before. Not that specific car, but cars like it. The kind that carried men who didn't ask questions because they already knew the answers. Allesia didn't run. Running meant guilt, and guilt meant admission. Instead, she walked. Steady pace. Eyes forward. Down the alley, through the maze of industrial buildings, toward the apartment she'd been renting under a fake name for the past 3 months. The Mercedes didn't follow. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Men like Dante Moretti didn't need to follow you to find you. They had resources. Networks. People who owed them favors or feared them enough that favors were irrelevant. Her apartment was a studio on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Peeling wallpaper. A radiator that clanked like chains at night. A window that overlooked a parking lot where abandoned cars went to die. It was perfect. Anonymous. Forgettable. She'd chosen it because it had 2 exits and a fire escape, because the building had no security cameras, because the landlord accepted cash and didn't ask questions. She'd chosen it because it was the kind of place where people went to disappear. But as she climbed the stairs, her hand trailing along the banister worn smooth by 1,000 other anonymous hands, she felt the walls closing in. She'd been careful. So careful. Changed her name, her hair, her habits. Moved every few months. Worked jobs that paid under the table. Avoided cameras, avoided attention, avoided anything that might leave a trail back to who she'd been before. Before the night her world burned. Before she learned that her father, respected, beloved, honest as sunrise, had been keeping books for one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. Before she learned that her mother had known. Before she learned that when you know too much about powerful men, your life expectancy becomes a matter of negotiation rather than nature. Before Dante Moretti had decided that consolidation required elimination, that power demanded sacrifice, that 37 people who knew too much about too many things needed to stop knowing anything at all. She'd survived because she'd been at university. Because she'd come home to find her childhood house cordoned off with police tape and her parents laid out in the morgue with bullets in their heads and her entire life reduced to a case file that would never be solved. She'd survived because the man who'd trained her father, the man who'd pulled him into that world of shadows and blood money, had found her first. Victor Constantine had found her at the funeral, his hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle as he told her the truth. That her father had been more than an accountant. That he'd been an asset. That assets had value until they didn't. That Dante Moretti had decided they didn't. Victor had offered her a choice, disappear or die. He'd given her money, documents, a new identity. He'd taught her how to read a room, how to listen without appearing to, how to spot the exits and assess the threats and survive in a world where survival was a skill you learned or a grave you filled. And in return, he'd asked for something simple. Information. Small things. Conversations overheard. Names mentioned. Patterns observed. Nothing that would get her killed, he'd promised. Nothing that would draw attention. Just little pieces of a puzzle he was assembling, a way to check the power of the man who'd murdered her parents. For 2 years, she'd fed him scraps. For 2 years, she'd played the role of the invisible girl, the waitress, the bartender, the coat check attendant at places where powerful men gathered to discuss powerful things. For 2 years, she'd been careful. And tonight, in a moment of pride or stupidity or grief disguised as courage, she'd looked Dante Moretti in the eye and forgotten that invisibility was the only thing keeping her alive. The apartment was dark when she entered, exactly as she'd left it. She didn't turn on the lights. Muscle memory guided her to the window, where she stood in shadow and watched the street below. The Mercedes wasn't there. Nothing was there except the usual collection of urban decay, broken streetlights, overflowing dumpsters, a stray cat picking through garbage with the dedication of an archaeologist. Minutes passed. 5. 10. 15. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, a ghost of a girl, pale and thin, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes that had seen too much and showed too little. She barely recognized herself anymore. The girl she'd been at 21, studying literature and drinking cheap wine and dreaming of a future that involved books and sunlight and peace, that girl was as dead as her parents. The phone in her pocket buzzed. Not her real phone. The burner she used for one person only. One contact. One lifeline to a man who'd promised to keep her safe as long as she kept feeding him information. She pulled it out, the screen casting blue light across her face, and read the message. Moretti moved 3 shipments tonight. Warehouse district. Tell me what you heard. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She'd heard plenty. Dante's men talked freely around waitresses, around women they considered decorative and harmless. She'd heard about the warehouses, about the shipments, about the territory disputes and the bribes and the politicians who wore Moretti's leash like jewelry. She'd heard enough to fill Victor's puzzle box with another dozen pieces. But something stopped her. Some instinct honed by 2 years of running, 2 years of looking over her shoulder, 2 years of knowing that survival meant trusting your gut even when your gut whispered things you didn't want to hear. Dante Moretti had looked at her tonight. Really looked. Not the way men usually looked at waitresses, through them, past them, at them like furniture. He'd looked at her like she was a code he needed to crack. Like she was a problem that required solving. And men like Dante Moretti didn't leave problems unsolved. She deleted Victor's message without responding and pulled the battery from the phone. Then she moved with the efficiency of long practice. Grab bag from under the bed, always packed, always ready. Cash taped behind the loose baseboard. Fake passport hidden in the spine of a hollowed-out book. Change of clothes. Toiletries. Nothing that couldn't be carried at a run. Nothing that couldn't be abandoned if running wasn't fast enough. She was halfway to the door when it opened. Marco filled the doorway like a solar eclipse, blotting out the light from the hallway. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both carrying the kind of casual menace that came from years of being the scariest thing in any given room. Alessia's hand moved toward her bag. Toward the knife she kept in the side pocket, but Marco was faster. He had his gun out and pointed at her center mass before her fingers touched the zipper. "Boss wants to talk to you," Marco said. His voice was surprisingly soft for a man his size, almost apologetic. "You can come easy or we can make it hard. Your choice." Alessia's mind raced through options like shuffling cards. Fight, she'd lose. Run, no exits. Scream, no one would come. Comply, maybe live long enough to find another option. Her hands came up slowly, empty, non-threatening. "I didn't do anything." "Didn't say you did." Marco gestured with the gun toward the door. "Let's go." They walked her down the stairs and into the night like she was a friend they were escorting home, casual and unhurried. No handcuffs. No violence. Just 3 large men and 1 small woman moving through shadows toward a fate she couldn't see but could feel approaching like a train in a tunnel. The Mercedes was parked 2 blocks over, engine purring, rear door open like a mouth. Allesia got in because the alternative was a bullet in an alley, and she'd survived too much to die in an alley. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Dante Moretti sat across from her, illuminated by the passing streetlights, his ruined suit replaced with a fresh one that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. He didn't speak as Marco closed the door and the car pulled away from the curb. Didn't speak as they drove through streets that grew progressively emptier, progressively darker. Just watched her with those eyes that saw too much. "Where are we going?" Allesia asked, because silence felt like surrender. "Somewhere we can talk without interruption." "We could have talked at my apartment." "Could we?" He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that managed to convey amusement and menace in equal measure. "You had a bag packed. You were leaving." It wasn't a question. Allesia didn't insult him by pretending otherwise. Bad feeling. Instinct? Experience. He smiled at that, a real smile this time, quick and genuine. "Yes. You have that look. Someone who's learned the hard way that danger comes in expensive suits and polite words." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and the smile disappeared. "Who are you really, just Allesia?" "Because waitresses don't clock exits. They don't assess threats. They don't meet my eyes like they're measuring whether they could take me in a fight. I'm no one. No one doesn't run. No one doesn't get kidnapped by crime lords either, but here we are." Another flash of that smile. Kidnapped. Dramatic. "I prefer to think of this as protective custody." Protective from what? From whatever or whoever made you pack a go bag and pull the battery from your phone. He sat back, his expression shifting to something harder. "Here's what I know. 3 hours after I left Café Marcello, there was an attack on one of my warehouses. Not random. Not opportunistic. Coordinated. Professional. They knew which warehouse, which shift, which codes. They knew things that only a handful of people knew." He paused, letting that hang in the air between them like smoke. "And earlier tonight, a waitress who should have been forgettable did everything possible to make herself memorable." Alessia's pulse was a drum in her ears, but her face remained calm. Years of practice. Years of hiding fear behind a mask of indifference. Coincidence. "I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in patterns. And you, just Allesia, are a pattern I need to understand." The car turned onto a private road, trees closing in on both sides, headlights cutting through darkness. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me who you really are, who you work for, and what you know about tonight's attack. And then I'm going to decide whether you're an asset or a liability. And if I'm a liability? Then this conversation will be very short." The car stopped. They'd arrived at what looked like an estate, high walls, iron gates, a house that was more fortress than home. Security cameras tracked their movement. Armed men patrolled the perimeter. This was Dante Moretti's stronghold, the heart of his empire, and she'd just been delivered to it like a package. Marco opened the door. Dante stepped out first, then turned and offered his hand. A gentleman's gesture that didn't match the context. Allesia ignored it and climbed out on her own, her feet hitting gravel, her eyes already cataloging details. Distance to the gate. Number of guards. Possible weaknesses. All useless information, but gathering it was reflex. Like breathing. This way, Dante said, and walked toward the house. She followed because the alternative was Marco's gun in her back, because cooperation bought time, because time was all she had left to figure out how to survive this. The interior was all dark wood and darker secrets, expensive art on walls that had probably witnessed murders, rooms that smelled like power and old money. He led her to a study, books lining the walls, a desk large enough to land aircraft, windows that overlooked grounds lit by security lights. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair that faced the desk. She sat. He moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of something amber and probably older than she was, then handed her one. She took it but didn't drink. Poisoning seemed unlikely, too easy, too crude, but trust wasn't a luxury she could afford. He noticed, smiled slightly, and took a sip from his own glass before settling into the chair behind his desk. A king on his throne. A predator in his den. "Tell me about Victor Constantine," he said. The name hit her like a fist. She kept her face neutral, but something must have shown because Dante's eyes sharpened. "There it is," he said softly. "The connection I've been looking for." He set his glass down with careful precision. "Victor has been a thorn in my side for 2 years. Nothing major. Nothing catastrophic. Just persistent. Like an infection that won't quite kill you but won't quite heal either. Shipments delayed. Operations exposed. Information leaked to competitors. And I couldn't find the source." He leaned back, studying her. "Until tonight, when a waitress reminded me that the best spies are the ones you don't notice. The invisible ones. The ones who serve drinks in clear tables and hear everything because powerful men forget that women have ears." Alessia's mind was racing, recalculating, reassessing. If he knew about Victor, if he'd made that connection, then she was already dead. The only question was how quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. I had Marco search your apartment. Very thoroughly. He's quite good at finding things people want hidden." Dante opened a drawer and pulled out her fake passport, her emergency cash, and worst of all, the burner phone with its battery removed. He arranged them on the desk like evidence in a trial. "Alessia Romano. That's your real name, isn't it? Daughter of Thomas and Maria Romano. Thomas worked as an accountant for the Bellini family before they were absorbed into my organization. He kept books. He knew where all the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. And when consolidation became necessary, when loose ends needed trimming, he spread his hands in a gesture that encompassed everything and apologized for nothing. Your parents knew too much. You killed them." The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd known it for 2 years, but hearing him admit it with such casual indifference was like having a wound reopened with a rusty blade. "I gave the order. Marco pulled the trigger. 37 people who represented risk. Who could testify? Who could expose operations that needed to remain in shadows? No apology. No regret. Just fact. Victor Constantine was your father's handler. He recruited Thomas years ago, turned him into an asset, used him to gather intelligence on the families. And after I eliminated that threat, Victor took you under his wing. Taught you the trade. Turned you into a weapon aimed at me. If you know all this, why am I still breathing? Because knowing you're a weapon and understanding what kind of weapon are different things. He stood and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at his domain. Victor is old school. Patient. He plays long games. Whatever he's planning, whatever he's been building toward for 2 years, you're a piece of it. Maybe a small piece. Maybe the cornerstone. He turned to face her, and something in his expression had changed. Less hostile. More curious. But here's the interesting part. When Victor texted you tonight asking about my shipments, you didn't respond. You pulled the battery from your phone. Why? The question hung between them, dangerous as a loaded gun. Answering honestly meant admitting guilt. Lying meant he'd see through it. But maybe truth, carefully selected truth, was the only place she had left. Because I don't trust him. I never did. He offered help when I had nowhere else to turn, and I took it because the alternative was dying. But Victor doesn't do anything out of kindness. He does things because they serve his interests. And tonight, when you looked at me, when I saw that recognition in your eyes, I knew his game was falling apart and I was going to be the sacrifice. Dante was quiet for a long moment, processing this. So you're not loyal to him. I'm loyal to staying alive. And you think I'm going to let you do that? I think you're curious. I think you want to know what Victor is planning, and I'm the only link you have to him. Kill me now and that link dies. Keep me alive and maybe I'm useful. She met his eyes, steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. You didn't bring me here to execute me. You brought me here to decide if I'm worth more alive than dead. He moved closer, circling her chair like a shark circling prey, and she fought the urge to track his movement. Stay still. Stay calm. Prey runs. Predators chase. It's instinct. You're right, he said finally. You are useful. But usefulness requires trust, and trust requires proof. So here's my offer. You stay here. Under my protection. Under my supervision. You help me understand what Victor is building. You give me the pieces he's collected. And in return, I don't kill you for conspiring against me for 2 years. That's not protection. That's imprisonment. Call it what you want. The alternative is a grave. He came around to face her again, leaning against his desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. But consider this. Victor killed your parents just as surely as I did. He recruited your father. He put him in danger. And when that danger became fatal, he used you to continue his operation. He turned your grief into a weapon. Your dead parents into motivation. That's not protection, Allesia. That's exploitation. The words hit harder than she wanted to admit because they were true. She'd known it on some level, had felt the manipulation in Victor's kindness, the calculation behind his training. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it confirmed by the man who'd pulled the trigger on her old life, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. How do I know you won't kill me the moment I'm no longer useful? You don't. But you know Victor will kill you the moment you're compromised. At least with me, you have a chance. He pushed away from the desk and moved back to his chair, sitting down with the casual grace of someone completely in control. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm not asking for forgiveness or friendship. I'm asking for cooperation. Help me dismantle Victor's operation, and when it's done, I'll give you something he never did. What's that? Freedom. Real freedom. New identity, new life, enough money to start over somewhere he'll never find you. I'll even throw in a guarantee that my organization will never touch you again. He picked up his glass and finished the amber liquid in one swallow. But first, you work for me. You tell me everything Victor taught you. Every contact. Every method. Every piece of intelligence you gathered. You become my eyes inside his operation. It was a deal with the devil. She knew that. But the devil she was looking at least offered terms. Victor had only ever offered chains disguised as salvation. And if I refuse? Then you're confirming you're loyal to him, which makes you an enemy, which makes the solution simple. His voice was gentle, almost kind, which made the threat more effective than any snarl would have been. But you're smart, Allesia. Smart enough to survive 2 years in shadows. Smart enough to know when the game has changed. So what's your answer? She looked at the passport on his desk, the physical proof of who she really was. Then at him, this man who'd destroyed her life and was now offering to rebuild it on terms he controlled. 2 years of running had taught her many things, but the most important was this: survival required flexibility. Required accepting that the enemy of your enemy might not be your friend, but could be your ally. Required understanding that moral absolutes were luxuries that dead people couldn't afford. I'll help you, she said. But I have conditions. His eyebrow rose. You're not in a position to negotiate. Then kill me now, because if I'm doing this, I'm doing it on terms that keep me alive. She leaned forward, matching his intensity. First, I'm not a prisoner. I need freedom to move, to operate. Lock me in a room and I'm useless. Second, your men don't touch me. I'm not entertainment. I'm not a toy. I'm an asset, and assets require respect. Third, when this is done, when Victor is handled, you keep your word. Money, identity, freedom. No double cross. No loose ends. Dante considered this, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Agreed. With one modification. You're not a prisoner, but you're not unsupervised. You go nowhere without Marco or one of my other men. You're an asset, yes, but you're also a liability until you prove otherwise. Earn my trust, and the leash gets longer. And if I earn your trust? Then maybe you become something other than an asset. He stood, indicating the conversation was over. Marco will show you to a room. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning how to destroy Victor Constantine. She stood as well, her legs steadier than she'd expected. Why are you doing this? Really? You could torture the information out of me. You could. I could do a lot of things, he interrupted. But torture produces unreliable intelligence. Fear produces betrayal. I'm building something that will last, Allesia, and things that last are built on calculated trust, not terror. You're more useful to me willing than broken. He walked to the door and opened it, where Marco waited like a faithful dog. Besides, there's something about you. Something that tells me you're more than just Victor's weapon. And I'm curious to see what that something is. Marco led her through corridors that all looked the same, expensive and impersonal, to a room that was nicer than any place she'd lived in 2 years. Queen bed with actual pillows. Windows that overlooked gardens illuminated by soft lights. A bathroom with towels that probably cost more than her monthly salary. It was a gilded cage, but it was still a cage. Door locks from the inside, Marco said, his voice still carrying that surprising gentleness. But don't get ideas. Guards outside. Cameras in the halls. You try to run, we'll find you before you reach the gate. He started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, boss doesn't usually give people chances. You must have made an impression. I spilled wine on him. Yeah, but you didn't flinch. Didn't beg. Just looked him in the eye like you were equals. Marco's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. He respects that. More than fear. More than begging. So don't waste the chance. Then he was gone, and she was alone. Allesia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking now that no one was watching, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She'd gone from waitress to prisoner to asset in the span of a few hours. Her life, already fragmented, had shattered completely. And the man responsible for her parents' deaths had just become her only path to survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the danger. Dante Moretti was many things: killer, kingpin, conqueror, but stupid wasn't one of them. He'd watch her. Test her. Look for betrayal in every word and action. And if he found it, the kindness he'd shown tonight would evaporate like morning dew under a brutal sun. But there was something else. Something she hadn't expected. When he'd looked at her, when he'd offered his terms, there had been curiosity in his eyes. Not just strategic curiosity. Something more personal. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had nothing to do with Victor or operations or intelligence. Like she was interesting to him beyond her utility. It was a dangerous thing, that curiosity. For both of them. Because Dante Moretti had built his empire on one unbreakable rule: never fall in love. Love made men weak. Love made kings bleed. And Alessia Romano, daughter of the people he'd killed, weapon forged by his enemy, was the last person in the world he should be curious about. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about the fact that her survival now depended on the mercy of a man who'd proven he had none. Tried not to think about Victor, who would know by now that she'd gone dark, who would be recalculating his plans, who would eventually come looking for his missing piece. Tried not to think about her parents, who'd died in service to men like Victor and Dante, who'd become collateral damage in wars they hadn't started. But mostly, she tried not to think about the way Dante had looked at her in those final moments before Marco led her away. Like she was dangerous. Like she was intriguing. Like she was something he wanted to understand, even if understanding meant risking the one rule that had kept him alive and in power. It was going to be a long night. And the nights that followed, she suspected, would be even longer.